Now, for the first panel of the day, to the future, taking action. This will be chaired by, I've been told by Fatima, a force of nature, somebody who has helped Fatima's campaign such a lot, Zenna Hopson. She is the CEO of Deleglio, sorry if I've got that pronunciation wrong, Rugby Works. Zenna is the former chairman of Ofsted and Children and Learners Inspection and Regulation Body. In this role, she spearheaded a new inspection regime, significant cost savings and the shift to put young people at the heart of inspection and education. Please welcome Zenna Hopson.
Good morning, good morning. I'm going to allow the panel to... Oh, what a shocker of a photo. Jeepers. Wowza. Well, you can tell it's true to form, can't you? Goodness me, I look absolutely terrified. Same lipstick, though. That's a great colour lipstick. A similar colour scheme. Wow. Hopefully that will move shortly. Welcome, everybody here today. I'm sure you'll join me in saying that we've got this second day off to an absolutely flying start. Before we get stuck into the panel, can I ask all of those of you that can stand up to stand up, please? Let's get a bit more energy in the room. Lovely. Can you please sit down if you have not brought up children that aren't your own? Please sit down if you've not brought up children that aren't your own. Please also sit down if you've brought up stepchildren that you acquired through marriage. Can we please give everyone who's standing a round of applause? You can sit down now too. If we don't have more people willing to put their hands up and to be foster parents, to take in our kin, to look after our our children's friends, we will not solve this care crisis because it is a crisis. I've been working with young people I've been paid to work with young people since 1985, and I do genuinely think that we are going backwards right now, which is why I'm here, why I'm Fatima's friend, why I'm Gina's friend, why I'm doing my bit to try and make a difference. I've done my bit to try and make a difference. I brought up 7 young people who aren't my own, plus 2 stepchildren. Who are my own. They all become your own, don't they? And they are all still very much my own and still phone me up every time they need money, and a lot of them are in their 30s now. All of them. Anyway, I would like to welcome you all, but I'd most like to welcome my incredibly esteemed panel. And I am going to start at this end and ask each panel member to introduce themselves. I think we've got a great long list here, and you can play Guess Who's Who, because I haven't let them sit in order. And we have somebody who's not here and somebody who is here, so I wouldn't look at the list, I'd do the listening. I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves and tell us a little bit about their connection to young people who are care experienced. Ta-da.
Thanks, Anna. And hello, I'm Gregory. I'm Executive Director of Homelessness at the Royal Foundation of the Prince and Princess of Wales, and I didn't follow your advice not to sit on the end, so I have to go first, which is obviously a mistake. But it's great to be here, thank you. And yes, the connection to the issue really is, we lead a programme called Homewards, which is Prince William's flagship programme on homelessness, so I'll be speaking mostly about that link today. And of course, as you all know very well, being in care experience is a significant precursor to a risk of homelessness, and we're seeing that in the work that we do, and obviously trying to catalyse solutions to address it. So I'm sure I'll have an opportunity to talk more about that in due course.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Nicola Eschbaecher. I am a Queen's nurse and a health visitor, and I'm currently working as a designated nurse for children in care and care leavers across 3 local authorities, and I'm the proud co-parent of 1,500 children that we look after. I'm honoured to be here today. I can't tell you how exciting this is to be with such esteemed people. I'm feeling a little bit like an imposter, to be honest. And my passion really is making sure that we do the best we can for the children that we're there to look after.
Hi everybody, so I'm Dan Mitchell, I'm the Executive Superintendent and Head of the National County Lines Coordination Centre. like my colleagues on the panel, delighted to be here. Real pleasure to come and talk to you all today, particularly about, from my perspective, county lines, which is, I'm sure many of you know what it is, but we've got criminal gangs out there who are doing all they can to groom, recruit and exploit children to deal drugs, and putting those people into the most harmful positions, which include arming them with knives. So we see lots of links between county lines and violence, as well as exploitation. And sadly, we see the over-representation of people who are care experienced in county lines. I've seen one study by Rescue and Response, our diversionary support service in London, who had 60% of the people that were referred to their service were care experienced. So, you know, this is a sort of sad fact that we see that over-representation. But I do want to caveat that, and I talked to a panel member before we came out to say that, you know, that is an over-representation for people who are care experienced, but there's also many people from the care system who are not involved, don't get into it at all, and actually, you know, that it's an issue that affects everybody.
Morning everyone, I'm Louise Hunter, I'm the Chief Executive of Who Cares Scotland. Try not to speak too fast because I'm a very Glaswegian. And Who Cares Scotland is the national, Scotland-only charity for care experienced people of all ages. And we campaign for a lifetime of equality, respect and love, with the belief that care experienced people don't necessarily always leave care formally, actually, or they do formally, but sometimes care can stay with people for a lifetime. So we're there to provide advocacy and to try and change legislation and practice.
Fantastic. It's extraordinary that there's such a full room on day 2. I am Sharon White, and I was for 5 years chair of the John Lewis Partnership. So any of you who have seen a John Lewis or Waitrose store, 70,000 person business, the biggest employee-owned business in the UK, the 3rd largest employee-owned business in the world, and with a very strong social justice heritage and history. And we've been working very hard to make the partnership the business of choice, the employer of choice for care experienced young people.
Hi, morning everyone. I'm Sarah Thomas. My current role is the Chief Executive of the Fostering Network, which is a national charity that works to support foster carers and improve outcomes for children and young people who are looked after. My background and how I find myself in this seat today is that I was allocated a social worker before I was born. I then became a social worker and have dedicated my personal and professional life to improving the outcomes for children and young people who are part of our care system.
Hi there, I'm Sharon Long. I'm the Director at Partnership for Young London. We are a regional youth policy and practice charity, and we look at how young people's voices and their needs and their solutions influence policy and practice across the region. Part of me being here today is we facilitate the Pan-London Children in Care Council for London. We have a youth advisory board. We have a network of young people that come together to shape the work, and we're working across partners, including health, business sector, GLA, London councils, to drive up a better offer for care leavers across London. Part of my personal interest about being here is I'm an adopter. I have a daughter who's been adopted, so I'm very well versed on what happens to young people when they are in part of those systems. I'm really pleased to be here. I think it's really exciting. I think it's real call to action in terms of what we can all do more of to make a better outcome for a lot of young people across London for me, across the country for you.
Hi everyone, I'm Carol Holden. I'm the Group Chief Executive of Coram, which is spelled with an A, if any of you are looking it up. And Coram is the birthplace of children's social care, originally the Foundling Hospital, and also the birthplace of fostering. Today we're a group of organisations dedicated to the rights, the voice, the education and best interests of children and young people through a multifaceted range of services, including the privilege of supporting the National Voice, which is the National Children in Care Council, and just celebrating the 50th anniversary of Coram Voice, originally the voice for the child in care. I come to this with, I think, personal experience that is resonant, which is having been chair of the National Autistic Society, the lead for children in care and care leavers on the Youth Justice Board, but also having navigated the reality of family support and SEND services for children, which has brought me to the experience, for example, of multiple changes of social worker, total discontinuity in the multi-professional agency team working, and permanent school exclusion. So it's a privilege to join you today.
Thank you. Hi everyone, my name's Jean Templeton and I'm Chief Exec of St Basils, which is an organisation based in the West Midlands, and we work with young people who are at risk of homelessness. We provide a range of housing and support services right through from prevention to those young people who are enabling them to live and work and be benefit free. I've spent the last 25 years there, and our organisation is dealing with the presenting issues of thousands of young people each year, disproportionately care experienced young people. 42% in our services are care experienced, and in our scheme for serially excluded young people, 75% are care experienced. Drives us all nuts that is the route into housing for young people. What I also am privileged to be is the independent chair of the West Midlands Combined Authorities Homelessness Task Force. And our role, it was set up in 2017 by a former chief exec of John Lewis Partnership, the mayor of the West Midlands then, and is still running cross-party support. And our objective is designing out homelessness, tackling all of the systemic issues that everybody over these 2 days is talking about. Thank you.
Well, thank you. I think you can all agree that we've got a very illustrious panel here. And we've had the privilege yesterday of hearing from young voices, from hearing from young people who have been care experienced, who are currently within the care system. And it is great to have a panel of adults who are trying to support them, to enable them, to help them become greater than they ever thought they could be. But what I'd like to hear from you adults is where you've really experienced the power of those young people, those care experienced young people, to make positive changes, because today is really focusing on what the future can look like. So I would love to hear your real tales of where you've seen positive change that's absolutely been led by the young people that we're here to serve. Take us away. No, I'm going to start down your end. No, I'm going to start at the other end of homelessness. I'm going to Midlands homelessness, from national to Midlands.
Ah, right, okay, thank you. So, and in lots and lots of ways, to be honest. So we were, between kind of 2007 until 2022, St Basils was privileged to facilitate National Youth Homeless Parliament. And that was an opportunity for young people from all around the country, as I say, again, representing those that are not heard, not seen, not able to influence government policy. And it was really, really powerful, because the way the young people worked was they looked at the issues that were affecting them. Then they used their lived experience to explain to ministers and Parliament what actually the impact was, so that your intention might have been X, but the impact on me was Z or less. And then to use that lived experience to make the recommendations for change. And some of those things were changed. Some of those approaches, lots of positive pathway models, there was lots of change. There was also a wee bit more resource. And sadly, what then happens is when the resources get tight, we default back to protecting the systems. And the Youth Homeless Parliament, the funding ended in 2022. So there is no youth voice there in terms of that national, in terms of the wider, and as I say, disproportionately young people that are care experienced in that process. So, yeah, don't cut things. You know, the good things we cut, we go into crisis and fund crisis stuff, which is all short term. So, you know, let's look at what makes a difference.
I think lots of people will pick up on the importance of voice and policy recommendations and impact in that way. And indeed, you have the opportunity to hear from our national voice in a few minutes. But I want to pick up on the issues of public perception and representation, and pay tribute to the work of the young people, care-experienced young people who have participated in the Coram Voices Through Time programme, and sought to tip the dial on the understanding and perceptions, and to tackle the stigma up front. and the particular film by a young man called Wolfie that affected me very deeply, and which went on to have 6 million views.
Hi there. I mean, this is going to be, there's so many amazing examples of where things have made a change. I think for me, I've got two very recent examples. The first one is a recent meeting with the Minister where we went as a group of directors of children's services, virtual heads, health leads, the Care Leavers Covenant, and a number of young people from the Pan London KIC Advisory Board. And the first thing that happened was the young people spoke first. They finished the meeting. They were key in it. The rest of us were all really quiet because we actually needed to step back a bit and make sure young people had the space to be articulating their solutions. That felt really positive to me because I'm in a lot of meetings with a lot of professionals, and young people's voices are not the priority that they should be. And what the young people had done is they talked to their peers as part of the advisory board to gather their views and opinions before they went in there. So they were really soliciting, making sure they represented the diversity of voices and needs, which was great. The second thing that happened was there was a London Higher conference recently, and young people from the advisory board were on the panel. And they talked really brilliantly about what universities can do just to support care leavers, really practical things. And they had everybody just listening to them and taking notes. And it felt to me like the power dynamic was shifting a bit. And it felt really positive. I really hope the change happens as a result, because sometimes we're in a lot of meetings where there's a lot of talking and things don't really change. But what I felt there was that everybody was looking at it from a real equity perspective and social justice perspective. And it felt really great. And it also felt really good. And I don't really like often being on these platforms, is that we didn't say anything. The rest of us were just quiet. We're there to support and facilitate. And that felt really positive.
I'm going to share an example from quite a long time ago. The Welsh Government decided that they really wanted to take action in relation to their role as corporate parents, and they developed a policy called If This Were My Child. And they rolled out education across the whole of Wales for every single person that was responsible as a corporate parent, which gave guidance for people to ask themselves before every decision that they were making, what would you do if this was your child? It was one of the most powerful pieces of work. I, at the time, was a senior practitioner in a fostering team responsible for recruitment, and I embedded that work by asking every single person who was assessing foster carers to assess them with that in mind. Would you want your own child or a child that you cared about to live with these foster carers? Help them to understand how important this role is. We trained our panel up. We embedded that message right throughout the whole of the local authority that I worked for at the time. And it made a huge difference to have your cabinet members and your lead representatives actually asking that question to themselves when they were making decisions about the whole of the council. It was really powerful, and we had a change of administration and the whole thing fell away. And my worry, and thing that I would say is so important, when we've started doing something that works and we embed it and it really makes a difference, we have to get a handle on ensuring that there is continuity when we have a change of administration or change of staff. All it takes is one team manager or one person to change in a system or a service, and you lose all of that good practice because everybody wants to make their own stamp on things. And actually we need to get over ourselves, to be quite honest, and start thinking about the children and young people and all be asking ourselves, and I take this into my practice today, what would I do if this was my child? I have asked myself that on every decision and everything that has ever been presented to me, and I would urge others to do the same.
I mean, I've got a slightly different perspective than a sort of individual story, which I guess is the perspective of how a business has thought about this, and maybe it's a little bit following up from your last point, which is you've got to think about this in a sort of multifaceted way. If this is is a piece of charity by a business or employer, sort of from a good heart, then these things aren't sustainable. And I think one of the things that the John Lewis Partnership has tried to do, and it hasn't been perfect, but it has been holistic, is to think not just about amazing new employees and, well, they don't have somewhere to live. And so the teams have also been kind of super supportive in really being sort of in loco in place of their families. But also we've tried to embed it commercially in the business. So we've run, or the team rather, has run this sort of extraordinary competition each year for a young person to design one of the John Lewis's brands, which is then sold, and the proceeds are then partly commercial, but also partly redistributed. Some of you will remember the John Lewis ad, a few years ago, which sort of, rather than an ad which is about please go and buy more stuff, was trying to highlight to the nation that when we're all sitting down and having our turkeys, that there are families and young people who have got very different situations. So for me, it is less about, if we have lots of individual stories, that does not make for systemic change. And I think for me, the sort of lesson for businesses is how do you do this in a kind of multifaceted way that brings the young people right in, but is also sustainable for that change of leadership or change of approach or commercial cycle.
Hey, thanks, Sharon. I'm actually going to follow on from what a few people have said about stigma and about creating a society that cares about care experienced people. As a membership organisation for the last 45 years, we've listened to hundreds of thousands of care experienced people, and they've told us that the system can change, and there's lots that can change within the system with legislation, with policy, with practice. But actually, until general population actually care and understand care and destigmatise care, people are still going to really struggle. So we hear routinely from people that are young care experienced parents-to-be who feel judged by health visitors or midwives at appointments when they're asked about whether or not they're care experienced because they don't understand why they're being asked that question. Children that aren't going to school today because they are worried that their classmates can't understand why they were being taken away by taxi 10 minutes before the end with the local authority's logo on it, obviously to some kind of foster care placement or some kind of placement somewhere. So lots of children, young people and care experienced adults who today are still feeling very, very stigmatised by virtue of the fact that they are care experienced or in care. And it's really important for all of our organisations to be working really closely to try and change that, because actually we can change all the legislation in the world, but until the general population care. I think I've got a couple of really good examples where us and other organisations have worked with children and young people who have been in school and trained the whole school, absolutely everybody in that school, from janitors to cleaning staff to teachers to the children in the class themselves, and talked in a really non-stigmatising way about care. A lot of what we hear about care experienced people is quite, some of the negative stats, and sometimes in order to get funding or to get other people to understand the plight of care experienced people, the sector tends to fall into that trap of talking about care as a really negative thing, and actually sometimes it's not. Care experienced people are tremendous people. It's not a homogenous group. Sometimes it's important to tell the truth, but we also need to be really careful about the fact that we as a sector can also be stigmatising people. We had a recent example of a child who wasn't turning up at school. He was only in P4, and we trained the class, and that little boy went to school, and they celebrated and they had a little party for him because he had found his forever family and he was going to be adopted that day, and it was all going through. We've also worked a lot with retailers like the John Lewis Partnership and others to create opportunities for care leavers, care experienced people to go into the workplace and not feel stigmatised, so that managers and team leaders understand a wee bit more about care and can really support that person. But with the huge caveat that any work to raise awareness needs to be done in a reframed, trauma-informed way.
So I think from my perspective, looking at it from a sort of policing angle, the most important thing for me really is where we bring the youth voice into the work that we're doing, particularly around stop and search. If you're a child or a young person who's been exploited and groomed by a criminal gang into supplying drugs, often you could encounter a frontline police officer at the time when you're carrying those drugs. You maybe have a weapon on you. We know that young people, the surveys show they don't trust policing as much as we would like, and so in that encounter, it's quite often the case that the young person could be hostile. They could not be willing to engage and explain why they might be in the situation they're in. They might not even understand that they might not recognise their own victimhood. So you can well imagine how the nature of that stop and search encounter could be very enforcement focused. They'd get arrested, they'd be sort of spoken to harshly perhaps and taken into custody. And it's really a negative experience. I think where I've seen real success is where we get the youth voice in to listen, to understand, to know more about what that feels like from the perspective of the young person, and then to train officers so that not only are they more trauma-informed, so they can think about what sits behind why that young person's come to be in that position in the first place in front of them, but also kind of what is it in the way that you talk to young people during that encounter that really matters most, that gives the young person the most likelihood to then thereafter make a relevant disclosure that might then lead to something significant in how we investigate their exploitation and hopefully then refer them into a diversionary support service who can take them onto a more positive life pathway. So for me, it's the stories from young people who have told about how they've been treated maybe not in the best way by policing previously, that we can then impart into our training to make those encounters better for future.
You asked about the impact of children and the changes they've had. I have two very short examples, if I may. The first is one of our care experienced young people in our area created a video about the healthcare experiences that they'd had throughout the journey and how people had interacted with them. That video is on its way round all of the health services that we have locally to try and make them understand his journey so that they can change for the better for the future for others who then follow in his path. The second one is far more personal. Prior to my job I'm in now, I was actually a specialist nurse reviewing the healthcare of children and making sure they had their needs met. I took a slight change in life onto another path and became a child death review nurse, where I was reviewing the deaths of all children from any cause between birth and 18. And it was a job I thought I would never leave. It was a job I was really passionate about. We had one case of a young person who was in care who died, and I started a journey to undertake a PhD looking at how we learn and prevent deaths for children in care more generally across the systems, so not just health but social care, safeguarding reviews as well. I thought that's what I was going to do, and then I got a phone call from Fatima, and I started to wonder what I was doing with my life a little bit, and then changed and came back into being a nurse for children in care. So it was the impact of that young person's death that has changed my life trajectory, and it's something that I will never leave, and I will always be passionate about keeping going forward. So that's a really big impact.
I'll also give a very specific example of, and I say this with humility because you'll have had hundreds of interactions like this as well. But a few years ago when we were designing the homeless program with the Prince, we engaged in a lot of visits around the country and internationally to kind of understand the issues around homelessness and the risk factors, and care experience obviously being a major one. And I met this young guy who had been care experienced. He'd aged out of the care system, did not have access to stable accommodation, had fallen into various forms of temporary accommodation, sofa surfing. He'd ended up getting involved in a gang, as he described it, gave him that sense of home and place and family, and engaged in criminality, was arrested, was imprisoned, was released, back into various forms of temporary accommodation, and so the cycle continued. And when I met him, he'd been he was being supported by a Housing First programme, so he had that stable place to call home. He had a fantastic support worker who really worked with him to understand his particular support needs and his aspirations, what he wanted to achieve in life. And he was volunteering, he was working, he was mentoring other people coming out of the care system and the criminal justice system. And I asked him and he took me to his flat, showed me around with huge pride, his home, and all of that. And I asked him, what was the most transformative support you received beyond the place to call home? And he described, essentially, he'd spoken to a support worker and he'd admitted he had no idea how to manage his finances. So the support worker had gone to a local bank and said, is there any chance you could help him with financial literacy? How can he manage his budget most effectively? And the bank did that, and that was the most transformative support. And it utterly transformed his approach to the way he managed his life and his sense of independence. And speaking to him, I just find it impossible to argue that the world, either for him as an individual or for society writ large, would somehow be better if he was doing if he was in the predicament he was in before, of this sort of endless cycle. But with the right support, a place to call home, stability, and opportunity, he'd completely put himself on another trajectory entirely. And it just made me think, what would happen if we'd have got to him and people like him sooner? If he'd been able to access that support from the outset. And he had a profound impact in the way that we designed the work we're doing, and the whole shift, the attempt we're trying to catalyse to shift the whole focus, as others have spoken about, towards prevention and treating homelessness holistically. So it's always about housing, but never just about housing, and that support and that opportunity being vital as well. So he had a profound impact on me and the work we're seeking to achieve.
Thank you. I mean, I think we'd all agree there are phenomenal examples of where real and positive change has been driven by young people and has been enabled by people who are there to professionally support and assist in that transformation, whether it's about being listened to, whether it's about changing services, whether it's about changing career or reverting to your career. What I am hearing, though, is a lack of consistency and a lack of stickability. It's almost like some of these initiatives come on and they're a bit of a trend, and we do them for a while and then the money dries up. And we can go back a ways and we can all, no, lots of you can't remember them. Some of us of our age can remember, when we had Sure Start centres. We can remember before that when we had family hubs. And things come round. And I think one of the problems that we really face is for young people, you don't just want to be a part of a trend. You don't want something short-term that then disappears. And I remember when I chaired Ofsted, not particularly illustriously, but running Ofsted gave me an opportunity to really try and pioneer putting young people's voice and young people at the heart of inspection. And I campaigned for inspections that started and finished with the young person, that tracked their journey, as opposed to always looking at everything from the institution's point of view. Any of you who are involved in the children's care system, or in education, or in adult learning, or in the court welfare system will know I abjectly failed. And I was at the top of that shop, and I could not turn that tanker around to get it to look at things from an individual's perspective, instead of always seeing things through the eyes of the institution and taking it from the institution to the young person. We need to change that and turn it around. And I think that would be one of my silver bullets, if I was to have a silver bullet, would be to look at how do we really galvanise to stop seeing everything through the eyes of the inspection and to start seeing things through the eyes of the service user. And it almost doesn't matter what service you are talking about there. But what I'd like to do is to ask my panel, and I'll start at you, and we'll run this way. We're going left to right this time. Don't say I'm not politically neutral. No, don't say that at all, because it's simply not true. And what I'd like you to think about is, when you articulate what is your silver bullet, what's the one thing you'd like to do, what's the mega thing you want to change, if you can you've got a couple of minutes each, so you're not in any rush, but if you can briefly set the context of the problem, because what I don't want is just motherhood and apple pie. I want something that can really happen here. And if you want to nick one of our pledges, feel free and articulate it. Take it away.
Thanks so much. If I may, I'll try and articulate a silver bullet as I see it, but sort of broken into four very much interlinked parts. And again, with the caveat, I'm focusing very much on the issue of homelessness and its link to care experience. So I think the first one is, as others have said, prevention. It's so important to shift the focus and the effort towards prevention. And that stat that you'll all be familiar with, that 25% of the adult homeless population is care experience, is a powerful demonstrator of the consequences of not doing that, of not working to prevent or intervene as early as possible. So prevention. The second is the one I touched on earlier around tackling homelessness. As with all forms of homelessness, tackling homelessness is always about housing, but it's never just about housing. So all of those interlinked issues, whether it's around employment and skills or the better use of data to identify people earlier who might be at risk, it's got to be treated holistically. And support and opportunity are vital. And linked to that is this theme that homelessness is fundamentally a societal issue. It follows, therefore, it will take the whole of society to tackle it. And many of you will be from delivering frontline services, and I'm forever blown away by the work you do, and it's incredible, and the commitment and the drive and the skill and determination that you show. But I'm also struck by the massive opportunities, and actually Sharon's touched on some of this as well, around other parts of society also leaning into this common cause. So the private sector, what is the role of the private sector? If the exam question is how can we support young people who are care experienced to access opportunities, skills and employment training, for example, well, voluntary services are amazing at providing support, but they're not great at employing people or training people because that's not their core function. So what about the spirit of collaboration that brings together the voluntary services or frontline services in the private sector, and that collaboration with each element playing to its strengths? And when we've seen that, and you know, Sharon, you've been leading a lot of work in this space, it's tremendously powerful in the impact it can deliver. But it shouldn't be limited to just employment and skills. It can be the role of the private rented sector. It can be the role of, you know, banks providing financial literacy training, etc., etc., etc. You'll know a whole host of other examples. And the final one I'd emphasize is around public perception, around raising awareness. Not just about the breadth of homelessness as an issue, because the average person does not think about care experienced young people when they think about homelessness. They think about adult rough sleeping. They also think it's an absolutely inevitable and insurmountable problem. So as well as raising awareness of the breadth of the issue, we've also got to raise awareness and optimism that solutions are out there, and they are. You'll have seen them. There are, in the UK and internationally, there are powerful examples. And we've got to raise awareness because that driving of optimism will be the thing that also drives action.
Thank you. We've got a 1 minute flash up here, panel, just so you know, so try and get your answer to a minute. I'll give you 1 minute and 10 seconds, maybe. I'm generous.
Thank you. Since this first came to my email box about the silver bullet, I've been thinking about this non-stop. And what I'm about to say I can't take credit for entirely. It's actually my co-pilot at work, Gemma Shannon, who really came up with the idea. We spend a lot of our time sorting the systems to try to better support the children in care with their mental health, accessing services whether they're in our area or out of our area. And one of the things we struggle with is the knowledge of that young person's care history, following them around all the systems and making sure they can access the support that they can need. We are but two people in a massive pond. One of the things we thought maybe might be useful is to replicate the national registry that we already have, the mechanism we have in place called the Dynamic Support Register, which is already running through healthcare to support autistic people and those with a learning disability. So some of our children get that support, but there's an awful lot that don't. And if that could be rolled out to be for children in care as well, I think that would make it so much easier for them navigating through the really complex healthcare systems.
For me, it's about making prevention more than something that we just say, something notional, and translating something real that is meaningful and actually involves some actual action. I think from policing's perspective, oftentimes we'll talk about preventing crime, preventing county lines. It's a key part of, or features number one in our policing strategy for tackling county lines. But actually what often happens is that the reality is most of the energy and effort goes into arresting offenders and identifying people at risk and referring them to specialist support services. So absolutely, you know, important things that we're doing, closing lines, removing the opportunity for people to be exploited, reducing harms. But actually the most important thing is we stop that happening in the first place. And I think the real way that we do that is by having better information, better data, knowing if people are involved and whether they came from a care home, what their background is, knowing where that care home is located, and then using the data, sharing the data across services. So this is a whole system response. It's not just about policing. But then when it comes back into policing, having that information from other services, having the policing data, putting together a rich picture, and then taking a problem-solving approach to say, what is the location, what is the place, what's the environment that's causing this to happen in the first place? If I can give a short example, in the last 5 years, we've seen that nationally, county lines is a problem that afflicts everywhere, but in London, it's been the prominent exporter of county lines nationally, and in Croydon particularly, we see most times that's the highest area where people are being involved, where they're coming from. So what that says to me is for the last 5 years, that's been the number one place. If we don't do anything now different to what we're currently doing, for the next 5 years, it's still going to be the number one place. And it means if you grow up in Croydon, particularly if you're a certain demographic, I mean, if you're in a care home, you're more likely to be involved, and we've got to sort of do something to stop that happening. And for me, that's getting the data, looking at the environment, and saying, well, how do we, what do we do differently to stop that same place becoming the hotbed of exploitation in the future that it has been in the past?
So there are lots of priorities that I would like to see happen. I think for me the number one would be the statutory right to independent advocacy for all care experienced people should they need it and want it. We've heard a lot over the last couple of days about all the statutory entitlements and rights that care experienced people have, and we're still too far away from having everything that we need for them. But actually there's a lot out there already, and we know that it's not been implemented, not because the workforce isn't trying really hard or isn't committed, but there are lots of systemic barriers that we're all aware of. But independent advocacy is that one person, an independent advocate is that one person that's there for that care experienced person for what they want. So in Scotland, it's kind of piecemeal who gets access to independent advocacy. In other areas of the UK, we've got better systems where it's an opt-out approach. But actually that's that one person in that meeting with a child, whether that's a children's hearing in Scotland, whether it's any kind of looked after and accommodated meetings, wherever that meeting is, routinely people are there for the best interests of the child, which is clearly very important, but an independent advocate is there to make sure that they firstly understand what their rights are, and secondly get to share their views. And we really helpfully heard yesterday from the panel through Coram Voices yesterday about how assumptions can be quite unhelpful, quite dangerous, because as a system and as a sector we make assumptions about what we think is right for care experienced people. An independent advocate is someone who's sitting there right by their side, understanding the process and helping them have their voice shared in some of these really difficult processes. So yeah, a right to independent advocacy would be my priority.
I mean, I don't love the language of silver bullets, because I think it sort of suggests that somehow there's a very kind of sort of straightforward way through. I think, just in the current context of, resources are very tight. You can't open a newspaper without, yet another sort of gloomy story about public spending and budget cuts and things. I do think for me, there is such an opportunity for more businesses to see the opportunity of bringing care experienced young people into a new home, into a new family environment. And, some of us have been in the same sort of conversations. I've been in conversations where you've got incredibly passionate HR heads who can't persuade their chief executives and can't persuade their chairs because young people are seen as an additional cost to employ. And I think the more we're able to share the stories that actually done well, you've got young people whose lives are not only transformed, and it's not always straightforward, but they're more committed, they stay longer, they're better at training, all those things which every business is desperate to connect with. So for me, I think a little bit like you, I think there's definitely a sort of public-private connection which recognises there isn't helicopter money that's coming through the public sector, unfortunately, in the next few years. But there is a moral obligation, but also a very strong commercial impulse, I think, for many businesses to be much more connected.
The one thing for me would be society awareness and what we could do to raise that. So for any of you that turned on any news channel this morning, you would have heard about another summit that is taking place today, the Energy Summit. It was on every news channel that I flipped through this morning and all over my phone. So the Energy Summit is taking place in London. The Prime Minister is there, a number of lead delegates will be there, stakeholders from across the UK, because the whole of society cares about what their gas and electricity bill is when it comes through at the end of the month. What the whole of society don't know is that the taxes that they pay is currently funding a system that is not only broken, but is actively failing thousands of children across our country. It is using their hard-earned money to send children hundreds of miles from their home to live in provision that they were not intended to live in, that doesn't meet their needs, that is actively causing damage and restricting their futures. Across the whole of the UK, this is happening. I think we need society to have much more power to care, to be expecting this to be on mainstream news, because actually it should be. It is scandalous what is happening in relation to the funds that are spent. If people understood the policy that this is driving, their hard-earned money that is paid in taxes is actually funding policy that is crisis-driven, crisis-led, and ultimately leading to additional costs across society in relation to homelessness, in relation to prison entry, in relation to the needs of these young people. And that's before we even start thinking about the people that it is impacting on. So for me, it's society awareness. We need everybody across society to understand that this impacts on them and that they have the power to do something about it, and they should be influencing their local councils, their governments, and asking, where's my money being spent? How are you making sure that this is the best for children? And how do we do that as a society? It starts in rooms like this, doesn't it? You know, being together, being collaborative, thinking about how we can do that, but we need our governments to take action on this as well.
I'm not even going to try and follow that. I mean, I've had two amazing speakers before. I've had loads of amazing speakers before me. I think there is a real call out, definitely, because we're not actually calling people out. We're trying to fix quite a broken system. I think one thing I would say is I think we have to be much more focused on our partnerships and collaborations. And I think one of the things that inspires me is when I go to meetings and everybody is really trying to do their best. We still need to challenge the system because you are working in a system that sometimes is actually set up against you, and I think that's really difficult. I think there's something for me about the fact that is that we were on a call recently. There's going to be a lot of funding that's going to go into employment and training through the youth guarantee from government. Business sector's got to be involved in that. We can't just churn out more employment and training programs for young people if the business sector is not ready and able to take on young people. As much as my lovely colleagues in local authorities, you know, you're doing a fantastic job, and we're looking at how young people who are care experienced get jobs in local authorities. Strangely, they don't all want to work in local authorities. They want to work all over the place. They're ambitious, they're creative. We've got to be really challenging, I think, about those opportunities that all young people should have access to and giving them as much space as we can to be in those forums. So I think there's something about partnership and collaboration. The thing that inspires me is, and I was thinking when you were talking, we've got an amazing colleague in health, and I know that wherever she goes, she will be talking about the needs of care experienced young people. She will be solution focused. She will be driving that agenda forward. And we need lots of people in all different spaces doing that conversation. And I think Sharon at John Lewis, you know, whenever I went into a business sector meeting, I wouldn't mention what my views are. I would just say, have you seen the John Lewis advert? Have you seen what Sharon White's trying to do? What can you do to step into that space? We've got to be a bit more challenging and creative about bringing everybody on this journey with us, because we can't just carry on talking about the data, and the data is not great, and it makes me really depressed. We've got to talk about what can we collectively do? What is the totality of our assets that we can all bring into this space? And then where do we start educating people about what is going on for some young people? Because a lot of my friends, a lot of my community, they have no idea. They absolutely have no idea, and you're right, the energy crisis is driving some of that. But when we're talking to young people who are saying that my housing bills are so expensive, I can't take on a job as an apprentice because actually I can't afford to pay my rent, so it's better for me to be on universal credit. That system's broken. That's not okay, because you're actually stopping people achieving their aspirations and bringing their assets in. So whatever they said, and a little bit extra. Partnership, got to be right across it. You're all here, you're fantastic, you're doing amazing work, but we all have to work in partnership because we cannot achieve this alone.
Gosh. Well, I was going to start with an observation, which is we in our society are not prioritising our children and young people, period. No matter what context they're being brought up in. And fundamentally, as Abraham Lincoln said, public sentiment is all. So every person in this room, every parent, every grandparent, every cousin, whatever, we all know it's not about us. It's our young people that are the future, and resources have been stripped away from them in the last decade. So there is a major context to this, where children in and around the care system are entering the care system because of that poverty of aspiration and support, and are then finding their way forwards with all the barriers and difficulties that have just been described. The second point I want to make is that through the Coram Voice Bright Spot surveys for the last decade, tens of thousands of children and young people in and leaving care have said exactly what it is makes life good. And what makes life good is a place to belong, an aspiration, a chance to shine, and someone who stands by your side. In every organisation that we are already involved in, and in every context, our most valuable asset is our time. And actually, every single one of us can make a huge difference every single day by considering how are we spending our time. And also by being there as a champion for any young person that we can help, no matter how long it takes. So if I brought that down to a single word, because this poor chap here has got a thing with a minute on it, and it's like no chance whatsoever, I would actually say the first thing is that there is a framework of entitlement, a bedrock of rights, and actually we need to make sure that every young person accesses them. No postcode lottery, zero tolerance for so-called local offers that are undermining equivalency and equality, removal of age discrimination, for example, in benefits. These things are within our power to achieve, but ultimately, Fatima is our magic bullet. Thank you, Fatima, because like Michael Rashford, she's achieving something by gathering us all here with our time today. But my final single word, advocacy, and you are it.
Very brief. You've only got about 10 seconds.
I thought it was worse being at the beginning, it's worse being at the end. Young people tell us that they want to feel cared about, not just part of a care system. Cared about with trusted support, i.e. we have to be trustworthy, and that they'll have somewhere that is affordable, that is safe, that is appropriate to live, in order that they can learn, they can work, and they can do what they want to do, okay? So I would like to see us nationally plan for what we want to achieve, not just what we want to avoid. I would like to see us not only have a national homelessness strategy, I'd like to see us have a national housing strategy. And in that national housing strategy, I'd like to see a national youth housing strategy with a youth offer, so that people, anybody, anywhere, but young people in particular, do not have to default to the homelessness system to get the accommodation they need to underpin everything that they want to do. Because actually we say we've got no money, and again on the radio this morning, London Council's really struggling because of the costs of homelessness, TA, all the rest of it. It is a complicated, complex issue. And yes, complexities are given, but we make complicated. So we need to simplify. We need to use the money, instead of spending it all on competition, you know, and all on, lots of companies, social value, big thing now, social value. Lots of companies, big social value teams, working out how they can compete with each other to get social value. Let's have a social justice piece. Let's agree what that social justice looks like, and then if you're going to put money into it, well, you can put a percentage into it, instead of all the money going everywhere in competition. The same for charities. We're all competing for resources. Instead of what everybody's saying here is collaboration, not competition. Simplify, humanize, personalize. That would be my silver bullet.
Thank you. You will all have inspiring ways to to continue to make a change, can I urge you to sign Fatima's pledge? There is a pledge card going around. There's a tree that you make pledges on. Work it out. It's not that hard. I haven't done it yet. But can I say thank you to our inspiring panel. Can I ask you to give it up for our panel? Thank you very much.